A pregnant woman gives birth in a Swiss psychiatric facility while FBI agents arrest her billionaire husband for attempted murder. Victoria Sterling was supposed to vanish forever, drugged and declared insane by her husband who was stealing millions. But James didn't know his crazy wife was an award-winning journalist who spent 8 months pretending to be mentally ill while secretly building the case that would destroy his empire. This is how a mother's love became an unstoppable force for justice. Smash that like button and subscribe, because this story will leave you speechless. This is The Sterling Deception. Let's begin. The security camera footage would later become Exhibit A in the most explosive white-collar crime trial of the decade. But on that December morning in 2024, as Victoria Blake Sterling stood in her Malibu mansion's marble foyer, she had no idea she was living in a carefully constructed lie. Victoria pressed her hand against her 7-month pregnant belly, feeling the baby kick as she watched her husband James Sterling through the floor-to-ceiling windows. He stood on their infinity pool deck, speaking animatedly into his phone, his silhouette framed against the Pacific Ocean. To anyone watching, they were the perfect power couple, tech billionaire and former investigative journalist, living their fairy tale in a $20 million estate. But fairy tales, Victoria had learned as a journalist, were often the most dangerous stories of all. Mrs. Sterling, Elena, their housekeeper, appeared beside her. "Your doctor called to confirm your appointment tomorrow." "Thank you, Elena." Victoria's voice carried that slight hoarseness that had developed recently. James claimed it was pregnancy hormones, but Victoria suspected it was stress. The kind of stress that came from feeling like a stranger in your own life. James ended his call and strode back inside, his expression shifting seamlessly from intense concentration to warm concern. At 35, he possessed the kind of commanding presence that had built Sterling Dynamics into a $2.8 billion empire. Dark hair, piercing blue eyes, and a smile that had once made Victoria's heart race. "How are my two favorite people?" He kissed her forehead, his hand joining hers on her belly. "Your son is practicing soccer," Victoria said, managing a smile. "I think he's going to be as restless as his father." "Speaking of restless, I need to fly to San Francisco tonight. Last-minute board meeting." Victoria's smile faltered. "Another one, that's the third this month. The price of success, sweetheart." James's tone carried that edge of dismissal she'd been hearing more often lately. "Amber will be joining me. Legal issues to sort out." Amber Cross. The name always made Victoria's stomach tighten. James's corporate lawyer and, according to company gossip, his most trusted advisor, tall, blonde, brilliant, and single. Everything Victoria used to be before she traded her investigative journalism career for this gilded cage. "I should get back to work," James said, already moving toward his home office. "The Tokyo markets open in a few hours." Victoria watched him disappear behind heavy oak doors, the same doors that had been closed more often than open these past few months. She'd attributed it to business pressures, the natural evolution of a marriage, the changes that came with pregnancy. But standing there in the cavernous foyer, surrounded by priceless art and cold marble, she felt more isolated than she ever had as a single woman living in a studio apartment. Her phone buzzed. A text from her brother Mike, a detective with the Los Angeles Police Department. "Lunch tomorrow, been too long. Sis?" Victoria typed back quickly. "Can't wait. Miss you." At least some relationships still felt real. That evening, as James's private jet disappeared into the night sky, Victoria found herself alone with questions that had been building like storm clouds. She'd been a journalist for 8 years before marrying James. She knew how to read people, how to spot inconsistencies, how to follow money trails. But love, she discovered, could make even the most skeptical person willfully blind. She poured herself a glass of sparkling water and settled into James's office chair, her pregnant belly making the movement awkward. The room smelled like his cologne and leather, familiar and comforting, yet somehow foreign now. His computer screensaver displayed a photo from their honeymoon in Tuscany, both of them laughing, her hand resting on his chest, his eyes full of what she'd believed was pure adoration. Victoria's reflection stared back at her from the darkened window. 28 years old, auburn hair now longer than she'd ever worn it because James preferred it that way, green eyes that had once been fierce with ambition, now soft with uncertainty. When had she stopped recognizing herself? The baby kicked again, stronger this time, as if sensing her unease. "What are you trying to tell me, little one?" she whispered. Outside, the Pacific waves crashed against the rocky coastline with relentless rhythm, the sound that had initially charmed her now seeming ominous in the darkness. Tomorrow, she decided, she would start asking the right questions. The journalist in her had been dormant too long. She had no idea that tomorrow would change everything. Victoria's hands trembled as she stared at the bank statement spread across the kitchen island. Lunch with Mike had been postponed due to his caseload, giving her an unexpected afternoon alone. What had started as a simple review of their household accounts had revealed something that made her investigative instincts scream. $3 million. Transferred from Sterling Dynamics' operating account to something called Pacific Holdings LLC. Then another $2 million to Meridian Consulting, companies she'd never heard of, despite being intimately familiar with James's business empire. "Think like a journalist," she murmured, opening her laptop. The same skills that had earned her a Polk Award for investigative reporting were still there, buried under months of pregnancy brain and domestic routine. Pacific Holdings LLC had been incorporated 6 months ago in Delaware. No public filings, no business address beyond a mail forwarding service. Meridian Consulting showed similar patterns. Shell companies, designed to hide money trails. Victoria's phone rang, James's photo filling the screen. "Hey, sweetheart." His voice was warm, but she could hear airport announcements in the background. "How are you feeling?" "Fine," she lied, minimizing the browser window. "How's San Francisco?" "Productive. Amber's been invaluable, as always. We should wrap up by tonight." "James, I was looking at our accounts today and Victoria." His tone shifted, becoming sharp. "We've discussed this. You don't need to worry about finances. That's my job." "I'm not worried. I just noticed some transfers I didn't recognize." Silence stretched between them, filled only by static and distant conversations. "Those are legitimate business expenses," James said finally. "Tax strategies that someone without a business background wouldn't understand." The condescension in his voice hit her like a slap. Someone without a business background, she'd investigated corporate fraud cases that had sent executives to federal prison. "I understand more than you think," Victoria said quietly. "Look, we'll discuss this when I get home. You should be resting, not stressing yourself over things that don't concern you." The line went dead. Victoria stared at the phone, her heart pounding. In 8 years of marriage, James had never spoken to her like that. Dismissive, almost cruel. She thought of all the times recently when he'd suggested she was being hormonal or overly emotional. When had she started accepting that narrative? Elena appeared in the kitchen doorway. "Mrs. Sterling, are you all right?" "Elena, how long have you worked for wealthy families?" The older woman looked surprised. 20 years, Mrs. Sterling. Why, have you ever noticed when they start hiding things from their wives? Elena's expression grew cautious. "I try not to notice such things, but you do notice." A long pause. "Sometimes, Mrs. Sterling, When men have something to hide, they make their wives feel crazy for asking questions. Victoria felt a chill that had nothing to do with the ocean breeze. She spent the rest of the afternoon digging deeper, using database access she still maintained from her journalism days. What she found made her blood run cold. Pacific Holdings LLC wasn't just receiving money from Sterling Dynamics. It was also making payments, large ones, to a private security firm called Titan Protection Services, the same company. She discovered that employed several former law enforcement officers who'd been fired for corruption, and Meridian Consulting, its sole employee, according to corporate filings, was Amber Cross. Victoria's phone buzzed with a text, "Delayed another day. Don't wait up. J." She screenshot the message and forwarded it to her personal email account, along with photos of all the financial documents. Her journalist's paranoia was kicking in, the same instinct that had kept her alive during investigations into dangerous people. That night, she lay awake in their king-sized bed, feeling more alone than she had in years. The baby was restless too, turning and kicking as if sensing her anxiety. Every sound made her jump. The house settling, wind through the trees, the security system's soft chimes. At 3 a.m., she heard a car in the driveway. Victoria crept to the window, peering through the curtains. A black SUV sat at their gate, engine running. She couldn't see the driver through the tinted windows, but something about the vehicle's presence felt wrong, predatory. After 10 minutes, it drove away. Victoria's hands shook as she called James. Voicemail. She tried again. Still voicemail. She called Mike instead. Victoria, Jesus, it's 3 a.m. Mike, I need to ask you something. Hypothetically, if someone wanted to monitor another person without them knowing, what would that look like? What kind of hypothetical are we talking about here? Victoria took a deep breath. If a husband wanted to control his wife's communications and movements. The silence on Mike's end was telling. Victoria, where is this coming from? I found some financial irregularities. When I asked James about them, he got angry, dismissive, and tonight there was a car watching our house. I'm coming over. No, Victoria said quickly. Not yet. I need to be sure before I make accusations. But Mike, if something happens to me, nothing's going to happen to you. Promise me you'll investigate. Promise me you won't just accept whatever story you're told. Victoria, you're scaring me. I'm scaring myself. After she hung up, Victoria sat in the darkness, her hand on her belly, trying to make sense of what she'd discovered. $5 million in mysterious transfers. A husband who'd never spoken to her with such contempt. A black SUV watching their house in the middle of the night. The fairy tale was over. The question now was whether she'd wake up from this nightmare, or if it was just beginning. Outside, the Pacific waves continued their relentless assault on the rocks below, and Victoria Sterling began to understand that she might be fighting for more than just her marriage. She might be fighting for her life. Victoria's doctor's appointment the next morning should have been routine. Dr. Patricia Chen had been monitoring her pregnancy for months, and every previous visit had been reassuring. But as Victoria sat on the examination table, Dr. Chen's expression was troubled. Victoria, I'm concerned about your blood pressure. It's elevated from your last visit. I've been stressed, Victoria admitted. About what specifically? Victoria hesitated. How could she explain that her billionaire husband might be embezzling money and having her watched? It sounded paranoid even to her. Marriage stuff. James has been traveling more. Dr. Chen nodded sympathetically. Pregnancy can strain even the strongest relationships. I'm going to recommend modified bed rest for the next few weeks. Nothing strenuous, minimal stress. Bed rest. Victoria's voice rose. Dr. Chen, I feel fine. The stress is situational, not physical. Your blood pressure says otherwise. I'll call your husband to discuss the restrictions. Please don't do that, Victoria said quickly. I mean, I'll tell him myself. But Dr. Chen was already reaching for her phone. Mr. Sterling specifically asked me to contact him immediately if there were any concerns. A cold dread settled in Victoria's stomach. When did he ask you that? Last week, when he called about your prenatal vitamins. He was very worried about your stress levels. Victoria felt the world tilt. James had called her doctor without telling her. What did he say about my vitamins? He mentioned you'd been forgetting to take them. I prescribed a different formulation that's easier on the stomach. He picked them up for you. The prenatal vitamins she'd been taking religiously for the past week, the ones that had been making her feel slightly dizzy and unfocused. I need to go, Victoria said, sliding off the examination table. Mrs. Sterling, we really should discuss. I'll call you later. Victoria's hand shook as she drove home, her mind racing. James had spoken to her doctor without her knowledge. He'd changed her medication. And now Dr. Chen was recommending bed rest that would effectively isolate her from the outside world. She pulled into a pharmacy parking lot and called Mike. Can you meet me somewhere? Not the house. What's wrong? I think James is drugging me. 30 minutes later, Victoria sat across from her brother in a small coffee shop in Santa Monica, far from Malibu and far from anyone who might recognize her. Mike's face grew increasingly grim as she explained about the financial transfers, the doctor's call, and the modified prenatal vitamins. Show me the pills, Mike said. Victoria pulled out the bottle. Mike examined it carefully. This isn't a standard prenatal vitamin brand. It's compounded, custom made. Is that bad? It means we don't know what's in it without testing. Mike pocketed the bottle. I have a friend at the lab who can run this quietly. Mike, what if I'm wrong? What if I'm just being paranoid because I'm pregnant and emotional? Mike reached across the table and took her hand. Victoria, you're one of the smartest people I know. You've investigated cases that brought down corrupt politicians and dirty cops. Trust your instincts. But James loves me. He loves this baby. Maybe he did once, but $5 million in shell companies. That's serious money. Sis, people have killed for a lot less. The word killed hung between them like a physical presence. What do I do? First, we get these pills tested. Second, you don't take any more of them. Third, you start documenting everything. Every conversation, every time he tries to isolate you, every financial irregularity you find. Victoria nodded, feeling more focused than she had in weeks. I can handle documentation, but Mike, if something happens to me, nothing's going to happen. Promise me you'll investigate. Promise me you won't just believe whatever story James tells. Mike's jaw tightened. I promise. That afternoon, Victoria returned home to find James waiting for her in the living room, his expression a mixture of concern and irritation. Dr. Chen called me, he said without preamble. She's very worried about your blood pressure. I'm fine, James. You're not fine. You're stressed. You're obsessing over financial documents you don't understand, and now you're putting our baby at risk. Victoria felt the familiar surge of self-doubt that had been plaguing her for months. Maybe she was overreacting. Maybe the stress of pregnancy was making her paranoid. I just wanted to understand. There's nothing to understand, James interrupted, his voice sharp. I've built a multi-billion-dollar company. I think I can handle our finances without input from someone whose last job was writing newspaper articles. The contempt in his voice was unmistakable now. Victoria stared at the man she'd married, searching for any trace of the person who'd once told her that her intelligence was what attracted him most. "Those newspaper articles exposed corruption and fraud," she said quietly. "And now you're looking for corruption and fraud where none exists. Dr. Chen thinks you're having an anxiety episode related to pregnancy hormones." Dr. Chen said that she's recommending immediate bed rest and possibly medication for anxiety. Victoria's blood ran cold. "What kind of medication?" "Something mild, just to help you relax." "I don't need medication. James, I need my husband to stop treating me like I'm crazy." James's expression softened, and for a moment she saw a flicker of the man she'd fallen in love with. "Victoria, sweetheart, I'm worried about you. This paranoia, these wild theories about shell companies and surveillance, it's not like you. It's exactly like me. It's who I was before I married you. You're not an investigative journalist anymore. You're my wife. You're about to be a mother. Those roles come with different responsibilities." The words hit her like a physical blow. Different responsibilities. As if being a wife and mother meant abandoning her intelligence, her instincts, her very identity. "I need some air," Victoria said, standing up. Dr. Chen recommends minimal physical activity. "I'm walking to the garden. James, not climbing Everest." Outside, Victoria's phone buzzed with a text from Mike. "Pills tested. Call me. Now." She walked to the far edge of their property, where the manicured lawn gave way to wild coastline, and called her brother. "Victoria, those aren't prenatal vitamins." Her heart stopped. "What are they?" "Low-dose lorazepam mixed with a custom vitamin blend. Essentially, James has been giving you anti-anxiety medication without your knowledge." Victoria sank onto a stone bench, her legs suddenly unable to support her. "For how long?" "Based on the prescription date, about a week, long enough to make you feel confused, compliant, and question your own judgment." "Oh my God." "There's more. I ran the shell companies through our database. Pacific Holdings has been making payments to a private investigation firm, one that specializes in surveillance and reputation management." Victoria looked back toward the house, where James was visible through the living room windows, pacing while talking on his phone. "He's been having me watched. And drugged. Victoria, you need to get out of there. Now. I can't just leave. If I'm wrong, you're not wrong. And if you stay, this is only going to get worse." Victoria stood up slowly, her mind reeling. The man she'd married, the father of her unborn child, had been systematically undermining her sanity while stealing millions from his own company. "I need more evidence," she said finally. "If I'm going to destroy my marriage and accuse my husband of fraud, I need to be absolutely certain." "Victoria, give me 48 hours. If I can't prove what's happening, I'll leave. But if I can prove it, I can stop him. This isn't a story you're investigating, sis. This is your life." Which is exactly why I have to be sure. As Victoria walked back toward the house, she felt something shift inside her. The fog of confusion and self-doubt that had plagued her for weeks was lifting, replaced by the sharp focus she'd once brought to her most dangerous investigations. James Sterling had made one crucial mistake. He'd underestimated the woman he'd married. Victoria's doctor's appointment the next morning should have been routine. Dr. Patricia Chen had been monitoring her pregnancy for months, but as Victoria sat on the examination table, Dr. Chen's expression was troubled. "Victoria, I'm concerned about your blood pressure. It's elevated from your last visit." "I've been stressed. James has been traveling more." Dr. Chen nodded sympathetically. "I'm going to recommend modified bed rest for the next few weeks. I'll call your husband to discuss the restrictions." Please don't do that, Victoria said quickly. I'll tell him myself. But Dr. Chen was already reaching for her phone. Mr. Sterling specifically asked me to contact him immediately if there were any concerns. A cold dread settled in Victoria's stomach. When did he ask you that? Last week, when he called about your prenatal vitamins. He was very worried about your stress levels and mentioned you'd been forgetting to take them. I prescribed a different formulation. He picked them up for you. The prenatal vitamins she'd been taking religiously for the past week, the ones that had been making her feel slightly dizzy and unfocused. I need to go, Victoria said, sliding off the examination table. Victoria's hands shook as she drove to a pharmacy parking lot and called Mike. Can you meet me somewhere? Not the house. I think James is drugging me. 30 minutes later, Victoria sat across from her brother in a small coffee shop, explaining about the financial transfers, the doctor's call, and the modified prenatal vitamins. Show me the pills, Mike said, examining the bottle carefully. This isn't standard. It's compounded, custom-made. I have a friend at the lab who can run this quietly. Mike, what if I'm wrong? What if I'm just being paranoid? Mike reached across the table and took her hand. Victoria, you're one of the smartest people I know. You've investigated cases that brought down corrupt politicians. Trust your instincts. What do I do? First, we get these pills tested. Second, you don't take any more of them. Third, you start documenting everything. That afternoon, Victoria returned home to find James waiting, his expression mixing concern and irritation. Dr. Chen called me, he said without preamble. She's very worried about your blood pressure. I'm fine, James. You're not fine. You're stressed, obsessing over financial documents you don't understand. And now you're putting our baby at risk. Victoria felt the familiar surge of self-doubt that had been plaguing her for months. I just wanted to understand. There's nothing to understand. James interrupted sharply. I've built a multi-billion-dollar company. I think I can handle our finances without input from someone whose last job was writing newspaper articles. The contempt in his voice was unmistakable. Victoria stared at the man she'd married, searching for any trace of the person who'd once valued her intelligence. Those newspaper articles exposed corruption and fraud, she said quietly. And now you're looking for corruption where none exists. Dr. Chen thinks you're having an anxiety episode related to pregnancy hormones. Dr. Chen said that she's recommending immediate bed rest and possibly medication for anxiety. Victoria's blood ran cold. What kind of medication? Something mild, just to help you relax. James's expression softened momentarily. Victoria, sweetheart, I'm worried about you. This paranoia, these wild theories. It's not like you. It's exactly like me. It's who I was before I married you. You're not an investigative journalist anymore. You're my wife. You're about to be a mother. Those roles come with different responsibilities. The words hit her like a physical blow, as if being a wife and mother meant abandoning her intelligence, her instincts, her very identity. I need some air, Victoria said, standing up. Outside, Victoria's phone buzzed with a text from Mike. Pills tested. Call me. Now. She walked to the edge of their property and called her brother. Victoria, those aren't prenatal vitamins. Low-dose lorazepam mixed with a custom vitamin blend. Essentially, James has been giving you anti-anxiety medication without your knowledge. Victoria sank onto a stone bench, her legs suddenly unable to support her. For how long? About a week. Long enough to make you feel confused, compliant, and question your own judgment. There's more. Pacific Holdings has been making payments to a private investigation firm that specializes in surveillance. Victoria looked back toward the house, where James was visible through the windows, pacing while talking on his phone. He's been having me watched. And drugged. Victoria, you need to get out of there. I need more evidence. If I'm going to destroy my marriage and accuse my husband of fraud, I need to be absolutely certain. This isn't a story you're investigating. Sis, this is your life. Which is exactly why I have to be sure. Give me 48 hours. As Victoria walked back toward the house, she felt something shift inside her. The fog of confusion and self-doubt was lifting, replaced by the sharp focus she'd once brought to her most dangerous investigations. James Sterling had made one crucial mistake. He'd underestimated the woman he'd married. That night, Victoria lay perfectly still beside James, listening to his steady breathing, waiting until she was certain he was asleep. The prenatal vitamins sat untouched on her nightstand. She'd pretended to take them while actually palming them. For the first time in weeks, her mind felt clear. At 2 a.m., she slipped out of bed and padded silently to James's home office. The door was locked, but Victoria had noticed him entering the code weeks earlier, their wedding anniversary. How perfectly ironic. James's computer required a password. She tried Sterling Dynamics first, no luck. Then Billionaire 1, still nothing. Finally, she tried Sterling 2024, the year he'd projected the company would go public. She was in. What Victoria found over the next 2 hours made her stomach turn. Email chains between James and Amber Cross that revealed not just an affair, but a systematic plan to embezzle funds from Sterling Dynamics before taking the company public. But it was an email dated 3 weeks ago that made her blood freeze. The Victoria situation is becoming problematic. She's asking too many questions. We need to accelerate the timeline. Dr. Chen is cooperative, and the modified medication should keep her compliant for now. If that fails, we move to Plan B. J. Amber's response was equally chilling. Plan B carries significant risk. Are you certain you're prepared for those consequences? A. James's final message. I've come too far to let sentiment interfere now. The IPO is worth $800 million. Victoria's current state makes her a liability we can't afford. J. Victoria's hands shook as she forwarded the entire email chain to her personal account, Plan B. What did that mean? She found financial projections showing James' plan to take Sterling Dynamics public within 6 months, but the company's books were cooked. The embezzled funds had created artificial growth that would collapse under scrutiny. Unless there were no questions, unless the widow of a tragic accident inherited everything and was too grief-stricken to investigate. A soft sound in the hallway made her freeze. Footsteps. Victoria quickly closed the browser windows and slipped under James's desk just as the office door opened. I know you're in here. Victoria. James's voice was cold, completely different from his usual warm tone. Victoria held her breath, curled beneath the desk. The motion sensors alerted me the moment you entered this room. Motion sensors. Of course. You can come out now, or I can call security to remove you. Victoria emerged slowly, her heart hammering. James stood in the doorway, wearing a cold smile she'd never seen before. Couldn't sleep? He asked conversationally. I was looking for a book. In my locked office on my password-protected computer. Did you find what you were looking for? Victoria stared at her husband, seeing him clearly for the first time. The charm, the warmth, the loving concern. It had all been an act. I don't know what you mean. I think you do. He stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. The question is, what are we going to do about it? Victoria's mind raced. She was 7 months pregnant, alone with a man who'd been drugging her, trapped with no other exit. We're going to get help, she said steadily. Whatever's wrong, we can fix it together. James laughed, a sound devoid of warmth. You still don't understand. Do you? There's no we. Victoria, you were supposed to be a beautiful, compliant accessory. Instead, you've become a problem. I'm your wife. I'm carrying your child. You're a liability. James walked to his desk, opening a drawer. Dr. Chen is very concerned about your mental state, the stress of pregnancy, combined with wild paranoid delusions. The shell companies are real. James, I have documentation. Documentation that shows a pregnant woman breaking into her husband's office, accessing confidential files while clearly suffering from pregnancy-induced psychosis. Victoria felt the trap closing around her. Mike knows everything. Detective Mike Blake, I'm afraid your brother is about to become very busy with an internal affairs investigation. Amazing what a thorough audit can uncover. James pulled something from the drawer. A syringe. Dr. Chen prescribed this for your anxiety. It will help you sleep peacefully while we discuss your treatment options. Victoria's eyes fixed on the syringe. Treatment options? A private facility in Switzerland. Excellent care for women experiencing pregnancy-related psychological breaks. Very discreet. Very expensive. Very isolated. For how long? As long as necessary. The baby will be raised properly, without the influence of an unstable mother. Victoria's desperation transformed into rage. The protective instinct of motherhood, combined with years of investigative training, created a lethal combination. You're right, she said softly. I am unstable, completely unpredictable. Before James could react, Victoria grabbed the heavy glass paperweight from his desk and hurled it at the office window. The glass shattered with a tremendous crash, setting off the house's alarm system. You bitch! James lunged forward with the syringe. Victoria dodged and ran for the door, screaming at the top of her lungs. Help someone help me. He's trying to kill me. She reached the front door and yanked it open as security lights flooded the property. In the distance, she could see the black SUV racing up the driveway, but she could also see something else. The headlights of Mike's police cruiser, approaching from the opposite direction. Victoria ran into the night, 7 months pregnant and terrified, caught between the devil she'd married and salvation that might arrive too late. The game was finally in the open. Victoria stumbled across the manicured lawn in bare feet, her nightgown whipping around her pregnant belly in the coastal wind. The black SUV was closing fast, headlights cutting through darkness like predatory eyes. Victoria! Mike's voice called out as his police cruiser skidded to a stop. Get down! She dropped behind an ornamental fountain just as the SUV's passenger window rolled down. Instead of weapons, she saw something more terrifying. A camera with a telephoto lens. Victoria Sterling appears to be having a complete psychological breakdown. A voice called from the SUV. She's attacked her husband and is running around in her nightgown, clearly unstable and dangerous to her unborn child. Mike emerged with his weapon drawn, but his radio crackled, all units, domestic disturbance at 1247 Pacific Coast Highway. Female suspect is pregnant and experiencing a mental health crisis. Approach with caution, prioritize medical intervention. Victoria's heart sank. James had orchestrated this perfectly. Mike, she called out, don't believe them. James approached from the house, playing his role perfectly. His shirt was torn, self-inflicted, Victoria realized, and he carried the syringe openly. Thank God you're here, James said to Mike, voice shaking with apparent emotion. She broke into my office, destroyed property, and when I tried to give her prescribed medication, she became violent. That's not what happened. Victoria struggled to her feet. Sir, put down the syringe, Mike said, though his voice carried confusion rather than authority. Men from the SUV emerged with cameras and official documents. One approached Mike with a badge. "Detective Blake, I'm Dr. Richard Hayes from Pacific Mental Health Services. We have an emergency commitment order. Mrs. Sterling is a danger to herself and her unborn child." Victoria felt the world spinning. "Mike, they're lying. James has been drugging me. He's stealing from his company." "Doctor." Hayes shook his head sadly. "Classic paranoid delusions. Very common in pregnancy-induced psychosis." Mike looked between Victoria and the assembled men, training warring with instincts. Victoria could see doubt in his eyes. "I need to see that commitment order," Mike said. While Dr. Hayes produced paperwork, Victoria pulled out her phone and began live streaming. "My name is Victoria Sterling. I'm 7 months pregnant, and my husband is trying to have me committed so he can steal millions. If something happens to me, investigate James Sterling and Amber Cross." "She's filming," someone shouted. James lunged for her phone, but Victoria backed toward the cliff edge. "Don't come closer," she warned. "I'll throw this phone in the ocean, but not before uploading everything to the cloud." Mike's radio crackled again. "Detective Blake, report to the station immediately. Internal Affairs needs to speak with you." Victoria watched her brother's face change as he realized what was happening. James had triggered the investigation at precisely the right moment. "I have to go," Mike said quietly. "But Victoria, I'll figure this out." "Don't leave me with them," Victoria pleaded. As Mike reluctantly walked to his cruiser, Victoria found herself surrounded by James, Dr. Hayes, and 2 security personnel. "This doesn't have to be difficult," Dr. Hayes said gently. "We can sedate you here, or you can come willingly." Victoria looked at the faces around her, seeing no mercy, but she still had one card. "I uploaded everything to the cloud," she said. "Financial records, emails, audio recordings. If anything happens to me, it goes to the FBI automatically." James smiled. "No, Victoria, you didn't. Our home internet has been monitored for weeks. Every upload, every email, every phone call. Your brother received edited versions of whatever evidence you thought you'd gathered." Victoria's heart sank as she realized the depth of James's planning. "However," James continued, "you have given us excellent footage of your complete mental breakdown. Very compelling evidence of your unstable condition." Victoria understood. This entire scene had been orchestrated not just to capture her, but to document her supposed insanity. "Last chance," Dr. Hayes said, producing another syringe. "Voluntary admission, or we sedate you." Victoria looked at the ocean below, then at her phone, then at the men surrounding her. She was trapped, 7 months pregnant, with nowhere to run. But she was also Victoria Blake, the journalist who'd brought down corrupt politicians. If they wanted a long game, she'd show them patience. "I'll come voluntarily," she said quietly. As they led her toward a waiting ambulance, Victoria silently promised her unborn child that this wasn't over. She'd survived dangerous investigations before by learning to think like her enemies. Now she'd learn to think like James Sterling. And when the time was right, she'd destroy him. The private psychiatric facility outside Zurich was everything James had promised. Beautiful, expensive, and utterly isolated. Victoria's room was like a luxury hotel suite with mountain views, but the windows didn't open and the door locked from the outside. Dr. Ingrid Müller, the facility's director, was a woman in her 60s with kind eyes and gentle manner, clearly believing she was helping a pregnant woman suffering from a severe psychological break. "Mrs. Sterling," Dr. Müller said during their first session, Your husband has provided extensive documentation of your recent behavior, breaking into his office, making wild accusations, live streaming paranoid delusions. He's very worried about you and the baby." Victoria sat with her hands folded over her pregnant belly and made a decision that went against every instinct. She would play their game. "I've been so confused," she said softly. "Everything feels like a nightmare." That's very normal with pregnancy-induced psychosis. Hormone fluctuations can create vivid hallucinations and paranoid thoughts. But it felt so real. The emails, the shell companies. "I was so certain James was stealing money," Dr. Mueller nodded sympathetically. "Your husband showed us some financial documents you'd been obsessing over, normal business transactions that your mind interpreted as fraud. Quite common." Victoria forced herself to look confused and ashamed. "I feel so stupid. James must hate me." "On the contrary, he loves you very much. He visits daily and arranged the finest prenatal care." That afternoon, Victoria met Dr. Klaus Hoffman, whose credentials were impeccable, but whose manner made her skin crawl. Too friendly, too reassuring, too eager to discuss her treatment plan. "The medication we're prescribing is perfectly safe during pregnancy," he explained. "It will help stabilize your mood and reduce paranoid thoughts." "What kind of medication?" "A mild antipsychotic, combined with mood stabilizers. Very standard treatment." Victoria nodded docilely while mentally cataloging every detail. The medication would keep her compliant, just as the prenatal vitamins had. James visited the next day, playing devoted husband to perfection. He brought flowers, pregnancy books, and tears that might have fooled anyone who didn't know better. "I'm so sorry," Victoria whispered when they were alone. "I don't know what happened to me." "It's not your fault, sweetheart. Dr. Mueller says this is more common than people realize." "When can I come home?" James's expression grew sad. "That depends on your progress. Dr. Mueller thinks it could be several months, maybe longer." Several months, long enough for the baby to be born in Switzerland, where James would have legal custody. Long enough for the IPO to proceed without interference. "I miss home," Victoria said, allowing tears to fall. "I know, but this is what's best for you and the baby." That night, alone in her locked room, Victoria began to plan. She was in a foreign country, 7 months pregnant, under constant supervision and being systematically drugged, but she still had advantages. First, she'd been practicing palming pills since childhood, a skill from her magician grandfather. The medication went under her tongue and was later disposed of. Second, her compliance had earned small privileges: supervised internet access for therapy journaling, phone calls to James, which gave her intelligence about his activities. Third, she'd noticed during intake that the facility's computer system was old and poorly secured. During supervised sessions, she'd glimpsed administrator passwords and network vulnerabilities. Victoria spent the next week playing the model patient. She attended therapy, took medication obediently while secretly disposing of it, and spoke lovingly of James. "I feel so much clearer now," she told Dr. Mueller during Friday's session. "The paranoid thoughts are fading." "That's wonderful progress. Your husband will be pleased." "Could I have a longer internet session today? I'd like to write him a letter." Dr. Mueller smiled. "Of course. An hour would be appropriate." That hour was all Victoria needed. Using memorized administrative access, Victoria logged into the facility's main server. What she found confirmed her worst fears and gave her the weapon she needed. The facility was essentially a high-end prison for inconvenient wealthy wives. Victoria wasn't the first woman committed under suspicious circumstances. Patient files told stories of inheritance disputes, custody battles, corporate espionage, all resolved by keeping troublesome women drugged and isolated. More importantly, she found financial records. The facility was owned by a shell company tracing back to Titan Protection Services, the same firm James had been paying through Pacific Holdings. Victoria quickly copied everything to a secure cloud account using encrypted email. But as she worked, she heard footsteps. Dr. Muller appeared in the doorway. "Mrs. Sterling, your session time is up." "Of course. Just finishing my letter to James." That night, James called. "Hello, sweetheart. Dr. Muller says you're making excellent progress. I feel much better, clearer. I have news. Your brother Mike has been suspended from the police force. Evidence tampering, taking bribes. Very disappointing." The message was clear. Her last ally had been neutralized. On a happier note, "I've been working with Dr. Hoffman on the birth plan. He thinks it would be safest for you to deliver here. Whatever you think is best." After hanging up, Victoria lay staring at the ceiling. James thought he'd won. But Victoria Blake Sterling had spent years investigating people who thought they were untouchable. James had made one crucial mistake. He'd given her time to think, to plan, and to gather evidence while believing she was neutralized. In 2 months, when the baby was born, Victoria would make her move. And when she did, James Sterling's empire would crumble. She placed her hand on her belly, feeling the baby kick strongly. "Hold on, little one," she whispered. "Mama's going to get us out of here." The game was far from over. Victoria's contractions started at 3 a.m. on a snowy February morning in Zurich. 8 months of careful planning, pretending to be compliant while secretly gathering evidence, had led to this moment. Dr. Hoffman arrived within minutes. "Mrs. Sterling, how are you feeling?" "Scared," Victoria said honestly. "The baby's early. Only by a few weeks. Perfectly normal, especially given your stress." Victoria had been timing her contractions carefully. They were still far apart, giving her several hours before delivery, several hours to execute her plan. "Could I call James?" she asked between contractions. "Of course. Dr. Muller thought you'd want him here for the birth." Victoria's phone call was brief and monitored, as always. But embedded in her seemingly innocent words was a coded message she'd been preparing for months. "James, it's time. I'm so grateful for everything you've done. The treatment here has opened my eyes completely. I understand now that I was sick, and I want to make things right. Could you bring the photo album from our honeymoon? I want our son to see how happy we were." James's voice was warm with satisfaction. "Of course, sweetheart. I'll catch the next flight." What James didn't know was that photo album from our honeymoon was Victoria's code phrase for the encrypted cloud account she'd created, leaving breadcrumbs for months in their conversations. As labor progressed, Victoria was moved to the medical wing. The birthing suite was beautiful, but she noticed cameras in every corner and how Dr. Hoffman lingered longer than necessary. "Mrs. Sterling," he said during a quiet moment, "your husband has arranged for the finest pediatric care. Your son will be well looked after." The implication was clear. The baby would be well looked after, while Victoria remained a patient indefinitely. But Victoria had discovered that the facility's communication systems had a fatal flaw. Patient rooms were monitored, but medical equipment wasn't encrypted. Every device connected to the hospital network transmitted data through vulnerable channels. Over 8 months, she'd slowly uploaded terabytes of evidence to multiple secure servers worldwide. Financial records proving James's embezzlement, email chains detailing his plans, audio recordings with Amber Cross, documentation of the facility's role in imprisoning inconvenient wives. At noon, James arrived with his usual bouquet of lies. He'd brought legal documents for Victoria to sign, custody agreements giving him complete control while keeping her institutionalized. Dr. Hoffman thinks it would be best to sign these now, while you're feeling clear-headed, James said. Victoria pretended to read them while studying James's face. The mask was perfect, but she could see the predator underneath. These seem very comprehensive. They ensure our son has stability while you continue recovery. Victoria nodded and reached for the pen, but instead of signing, she activated the emergency beacon she'd hidden in her hospital gown, a device constructed from salvaged components during her captivity. James, she said clearly, before I sign these, I need you to know something. I remember everything. His expression changed instantly, the loving husband disappearing. Victoria, I remember the emails between you and Amber about Plan B. I remember you drugging me with fake prenatal vitamins. I remember you having me committed so you could steal my inheritance and take our child. James glanced around, calculating his response. You're having another episode. But Victoria smiled. No, James. What's happening is that the FBI is currently raiding Sterling Dynamics. Amber Cross is being arrested, and every major news outlet is receiving copies of our recorded conversations. James's face went white. That's impossible. You taught me to be patient, to plan ahead. 8 months in this prison gave me plenty of time to perfect those skills. The emergency beacon had activated multiple systems simultaneously. Dead man's switches that triggered if Victoria didn't check in regularly, cloud storage accounts automatically releasing their contents, audio and video files broadcasting live to social media platforms worldwide. James grabbed Victoria's arm roughly. You're going to sign those papers. Take your hands off me, Victoria said clearly, staring into the security camera. I'm being physically threatened by my husband who has been drugging me and stealing millions. Sirens outside made James release her. Through the window, Victoria could see vehicles racing up the mountain road. How, James whispered, did you really think you were the only one who could plan ahead? I've been building this case for 8 months, waiting for the right moment. Victoria smiled through another contraction. You wanted me patient and compliant. Mission accomplished. Mrs. Sterling. A woman in an FBI windbreaker stood in the doorway with Swiss police behind her. I'm Special Agent Sarah Chen. We've been waiting 8 months for your signal. As federal agents arrested James Sterling and Swiss police secured the facility, Victoria's son decided to make his entrance. William Blake Sterling was born free, with his father in custody and his mother's vindication complete. Justice, Victoria realized, was the sweetest relief of all. 6 months after William's birth, Victoria sat in a federal courthouse in Manhattan, holding her son while watching James Sterling's empire crumble in real time. The courtroom was packed with reporters, federal agents, and Sterling Dynamics shareholders who'd lost billions when the stock collapsed. Your Honor, Assistant U.S. Attorney Margaret Rodriguez addressed the judge. The evidence against Mr. Sterling is overwhelming. Wire fraud, embezzlement, conspiracy, and the systematic imprisonment of his wife to cover his crimes. Victoria watched James at the defendant's table, noting how different he looked in his orange jumpsuit. The commanding presence that had once intimidated her was gone, replaced by the hunched posture of a man whose world had been obliterated. Amber Cross had already pleaded guilty and testified against James in exchange for a reduced sentence. Her testimony revealed the full scope of their plan to embezzle $800 million before taking Sterling Dynamics public. Mr. Sterling not only stole from his company, Amber had testified, but orchestrated having his wife committed to a psychiatric facility in Switzerland, When she became suspicious, he drugged her with anti-anxiety medication disguised as prenatal vitamins. The evidence Victoria had gathered during her captivity formed the prosecution's backbone. Audio recordings, financial documents, email chains, and testimony from other imprisoned women painted a picture of systematic abuse and corruption. Dr. Klaus Hoffman and Dr. Patricia Chen had also been arrested. Chen's medical license was revoked after it was revealed she'd been paid $200,000 for false psychiatric evaluations. The Swiss facility was shut down. The defendant exploited his wealth to create a web of corruption spanning multiple countries. Prosecutor Rodriguez continued. He destroyed evidence, bribed officials, and attempted to permanently institutionalize his wife to cover his crimes. Victoria's brother, Mike, sat beside her, his detective badge restored after the internal affairs investigation was revealed as part of James's manipulation campaign. "Mrs. Sterling," the judge called out, "the court would like to hear your victim impact statement." Victoria stood slowly, adjusting William in her arms. She'd thought about this moment for months, wondering what she would say to the man who'd tried to destroy her life. "Your Honor, James Sterling didn't just embezzle money or commit fraud. He weaponized psychiatry, medical authority, and the legal system to gaslight and imprison his wife. He turned my pregnancy into a weapon against me, used my love as manipulation, and nearly succeeded in erasing my identity entirely." Victoria looked directly at James, who stared at the table. "But he made one crucial mistake. He underestimated me. He saw a pregnant wife as a problem to be managed rather than a person to be respected. He forgot that I was an investigative journalist who'd spent years exposing corruption." William gurgled softly, and Victoria smiled. "The most important thing James Sterling stole wasn't money. It was time. Time with my son. Time with my family. But adversity taught me who I really am. I'm not the compliant trophy wife he tried to create. I'm Victoria Blake Sterling, and I'm a survivor." Victoria continued. "I don't want revenge. I want justice for every woman who's been gaslit or imprisoned by powerful men who think wealth makes them untouchable. I want accountability for the doctors and officials who participated. And I want my son to grow up in a world where women are believed when they speak truth about abuse." When the judge announced the sentence, 25 years in federal prison without parole, James finally raised his head. For just a moment, Victoria saw a flicker of the man she'd once loved, broken and defeated. After the trial, Victoria stood on the courthouse steps with William, facing reporters. The questions came fast. "Mrs. Sterling, what's next for you? Will you continue investigating? How do you feel about the sentence?" Victoria looked down at William's curious face. "I've started a foundation to help women who've been victims of psychiatric abuse and legal manipulation. Too many women have been silenced by powerful men who use the system against them. Will you return to journalism?" Victoria smiled. "I never stopped being an investigative journalist. I just had to investigate my own life for a while." As the crowd dispersed, Mike joined Victoria. "So what now, sis? Now I rebuild, on my own terms, with my own choices." Victoria looked out at the city skyline, feeling truly free for the first time in over a year. James Sterling had tried to erase her, but instead had forged her into something stronger. But as they walked toward Mike's car, Victoria noticed a familiar figure watching from across the street. A woman in an expensive suit with predatory eyes and a cold smile. Someone who looked remarkably like Amber Cross, who was supposed to be in federal custody. Victoria's investigative instincts kicked in. She pulled out her phone and photographed the woman, who saw Victoria watching and smiled, raising her hand in a small wave before disappearing into the crowd. "Mike," she said quietly, "we might have a problem." James Sterling's empire had fallen, but Victoria Blake Sterling was just beginning to rise. 3 weeks after the trial, Victoria was settling into her new Central Park apartment when her doorbell rang at 9 p.m. Through the peephole, she saw a nervous middle-aged woman clutching a manila envelope. "Mrs. Sterling, my name is Dr. Elena Rodriguez. I was a psychiatrist at the Swiss facility. I need to speak with you urgently." Victoria's maternal instinct screamed danger, but her journalistic curiosity won. She opened the door with the chain attached. "What do you want to give you this?" Dr. Rodriguez held up the envelope. "And to warn you, James Sterling wasn't the mastermind. He was just a useful fool." Victoria's blood turned to ice. "What are you talking about? May I come in? What I have to tell you could save your life." Against her better judgment, Victoria let the woman inside, positioning herself between the stranger and William's bedroom. "James Sterling was being manipulated from the beginning," Dr. Rodriguez began, her accent heavy with fear. "The real architect is still free." She opened the envelope and spread photographs across Victoria's coffee table, pictures of Amber Cross, but also the same woman with different hair, different clothes, different names. Amber Cross isn't her real name. She's Amanda Carlyle, a criminal who specializes in corporate espionage and identity theft. She's done this before, in London, Tokyo, Mumbai. She seduces wealthy men, convinces them to commit crimes, then disappears with their money while they go to prison. Victoria studied the photographs, noting the subtle differences in appearance. James is in federal prison. How could she have gotten his money? Because James never had the $800 million. Amanda did. She's been manipulating the company's finances for years, using James's access codes, the money he thought he was stealing. She'd already moved it to accounts he didn't know existed. The implications hit Victoria like a physical blow. The embezzlement conviction was based on financial records that Amanda constructed to implicate James while hiding her involvement. She testified against him to maintain her cover, but kept the money. Victoria sank into her chair. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because Amanda Carlyle doesn't leave loose ends. James was supposed to die in prison. You were supposed to stay institutionalized permanently. Your son was supposed to be adopted by her associates, but we escaped, which makes you a threat. She's done this 17 times in 12 countries. You're the first victim who gathered enough evidence to expose her methods." Victoria's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Beautiful baby. Victoria, sleep well tonight." Dr. Rodriguez saw Victoria's face go white. "She's watching you. Why haven't you gone to the FBI?" "I tried. Amanda has connections everywhere. The agents I spoke to either didn't believe me or suddenly transferred. She's been building this network for 15 years. Victoria walked to the window, checking the street below. A black sedan was parked across from her building. "What do you want from me?" "Help me stop her. You have credibility now, media attention, connections. I have evidence of her other crimes, but I need someone with your platform to expose her." Victoria looked toward William's bedroom, then back at the photographs. 17 men imprisoned or dead. Dozens of women and children disappeared. "If I help you, she'll come after my son. If you don't help me, she'll eventually come after your son anyway. You're the only person who's ever escaped her completely." Victoria's phone rang. Mike's number. "Victoria, where are you?" "At home. Why?" "There's been an explosion at Richard Chen's penthouse. He's dead, along with his new girlfriend, Rebecca Morrison. The FBI is calling it a gas leak, but..." Victoria's eyes met Dr. Rodriguez's knowing gaze. "But you don't think it was an accident?" Victoria finished. "Rebecca Morrison's body was badly burned, but they found dental records. Problem is, those same records match a woman who died in a car crash in London 3 years ago. Victoria felt the final pieces clicking into place. Amanda Carlyle hadn't died in the explosion. She'd killed Richard Chen and faked her own death, just as she'd done before. "Mike, I need you to come to my apartment, now, and bring backup." After hanging up, Victoria turned to Dr. Rodriguez. "If we're going to do this, we do it right. Full documentation, multiple agencies, international cooperation. Amanda will disappear again. She has escape routes planned." "Not this time," Victoria said, her investigative instincts fully engaged. "This time, we're going to be the ones who plan ahead." Victoria looked out the window again. The black sedan was gone, but she knew Amanda Carlyle was still out there, probably already planning her next identity, her next victim. But Victoria Blake Sterling had spent 8 months learning patience in a Swiss psychiatric facility. She'd learned to think strategically, to gather evidence methodically, and to wait for the perfect moment to strike. Amanda Carlyle had made the same mistake James Sterling had made. She'd underestimated the woman she'd tried to destroy. "Dr. Rodriguez," Victoria said, "tell me everything you know about Amanda Carlyle's methods. Every detail, every pattern, every weakness. You're really going to do this." Victoria looked toward William's bedroom, then back at the photographs of Amanda's victims. "I'm not just going to expose her, I'm going to end her." Somewhere in the city, Amanda Carlyle was planning her next move, confident she'd eliminated all threats. She had no idea that Victoria Sterling was just getting started. 6 months later, Victoria stood in the same federal courthouse where James had been sentenced, but this time she was the star witness against Amanda Carlyle. The woman at the defendant's table bore little resemblance to the confident Amber Cross who had testified against James. Prison orange didn't suit her, and the weight of evidence had stripped away her predatory confidence. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Prosecutor Rodriguez addressed the court, "what you've heard represents the most sophisticated criminal conspiracy we've ever prosecuted. The defendant, using 17 different identities across 12 countries, systematically destroyed lives for profit. Victoria held William, now 1 year old and walking, as she watched justice finally being served. The baby babbled softly, drawing smiles from jury members who'd spent weeks hearing about Amanda's horrors. Dr. Elena Rodriguez sat behind Victoria, having been granted witness protection in exchange for her testimony. Together, they'd built an unshakable case using financial records, victim testimonies, and surveillance footage from 12 countries. Ms. Carlyle's pattern was consistent. The prosecutor continued. She would seduce wealthy men, manipulate them into compromising positions, then extract their assets while destroying their lives. When victims became inconvenient, they died in accidents. Victoria's investigation had uncovered 17 victims over 15 years. Tech executives, oil presidents, pharmaceutical billionaires, all dead or imprisoned while Amanda moved their money through shell companies and corrupt officials. James Sterling was just her most recent victim, the prosecutor explained. She convinced him to embezzle money she was actually stealing herself. When his wife became suspicious, Amanda suggested the psychiatric facility that she secretly controlled. The Swiss facility had been key to unraveling Amanda's entire operation. Victoria's captivity had allowed her to document not just her own case, but the systematic imprisonment of dozens of women worldwide. "Mrs. Sterling," the prosecutor called, "would you please tell the jury what happened when you realized your husband was being manipulated?" Victoria stood, shifting William to her hip. "I realized James wasn't smart enough to orchestrate something this sophisticated. Someone else was pulling the strings." She looked directly at Amanda, who stared back with cold hatred. When Dr. Rodriguez contacted me with evidence of Amanda's other crimes, I understood that James and I were just the latest victims in a pattern spanning over a decade. Victoria's investigation had taken 6 months and required cooperation from 12 countries. The evidence included financial records, video surveillance, survivor testimony, digital forensics, and DNA evidence linking Amanda to crime scenes. The defendant thought she was untouchable. Victoria continued. She'd perfected a system that allowed her to destroy lives while remaining invisible. But she made one crucial mistake. She underestimated the bond between a mother and her child. When the verdict came back, guilty on all counts including murder, fraud, conspiracy, and human trafficking, Victoria felt a weight lift that she'd been carrying for over 2 years. Amanda Carlisle, the judge announced, "You are hereby sentenced to life in prison without possibility of parole." As Amanda was led away in shackles, she stopped and looked directly at Victoria. "You think this is over?" she said quietly. "I had partners, associates." Victoria met her gaze steadily. "Then I guess I'll have to stop them too." Amanda smiled coldly. "You have no idea what you've gotten yourself into." "Actually," Victoria replied, "I have exactly the idea I need." After the trial, Victoria stood on the courthouse steps with William, facing reporters and survivors. "Amanda Carlisle stole years from all of us," Victoria said. "She destroyed families, murdered innocent people, and corrupted systems meant to protect victims. But she also taught us that justice requires vigilance. What's next for you?" "The foundation I've established will work internationally to identify and stop criminals like Amanda. There are other predators out there using wealth and connections to exploit vulnerable people." Victoria had used her share of recovered assets to create the Sterling Foundation for Justice, dedicated to investigating sophisticated fraud and supporting manipulation victims. "The most important thing Amanda stole wasn't money," Victoria continued. "It was trust. But trust can be rebuilt, and justice can be served, if we're willing to fight for it." As the crowd dispersed, Mike joined Victoria on the courthouse steps. "So what now, sis?" Victoria looked out at the city, thinking about Amanda's warning about partners and associates. The investigation had revealed connections to criminal networks in dozens of countries. "Now I get back to work," Victoria said. "There are other cases, other victims, other criminals who think they're untouchable." Her phone buzzed with a message from London Metropolitan Police. "Mrs. Sterling, we have 7 missing women whose disappearances match Carlisle patterns. Can you help?" Victoria showed the message to Mike, who whistled low. "Already." "The work never stops," Victoria said, typing back, "Send me everything you have." William clapped his hands as if he understood, and Victoria laughed. "You hear that, little man? Mama's got more bad guys to catch." As they drove away, Victoria felt something she hadn't experienced in over 2 years, complete freedom, not just from James's manipulation or Amanda's threats, but from the fear that had controlled her life. She was no longer the woman who'd been pushed downstairs or imprisoned in Switzerland. She wasn't the victim who'd been drugged and gaslit. She was Victoria Blake Sterling, investigative journalist, survivor, mother, and founder of an international justice organization. She'd learned to think like her enemies, to be patient like a hunter, and to strike with precision. Amanda Carlisle had tried to erase her, but instead had forged her into something far more dangerous. The Sterling Empire had fallen, but the Sterling legacy was just beginning. Victoria had learned the most important lesson of all sometimes. The greatest victory isn't avoiding the trap. It's surviving it and using that survival to help others escape. The fight for justice never truly ends. It just finds new battlefields and new champions.